the twist is fundamentally that while he used a lot of Crowleyite material, he kind of reframed it. So he took the ideas of Magick and moved them into something else. So where, for example, Crowley will talk about thelema, or the will, how you impose your will on other people. In Scientology, this becomes intention and how you make people do what you want.
The magic cults of the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries in the Middle East were fascinating.
When I first saw this thing, I didn't believe it. I mean, I knew that what was being said was true from my own research. Hubbard was very definitely on the dark side of the Force.
But it's fascinating work in itself, and that's work written by Aleister Crowley, the late Aleister Crowley, my very good friend.
This is something masquerading as a religion that seeks to silence its critic. Now, thankfully, there are thousands of critics.
All right, we are joined again by Jon Atack, and Jon has returned to share information about a new book that he's written that's a little bit of a departure. It's still covering the main subject to a degree that I feel you're known for, Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, and his biographical history. But there's a bit of an angle to it. So how are you doing today, Jon?
I'm doing very well, and it's great to see you, Eric. It's been far too long.
It has been a minute, for sure, for sure. The new book that you've released, I believe it's out now, is If Scientology Ruled the World.
Scientology Ruled the World. Nazi occultism.
Nazi occultists, sex magic, space aliens, and the second coming. So if that doesn't grab you on how crazy this topic's going to go, I don't know what will. So can you explain the basic premise of the book and what led you down this very dark path?
Well, I was looking to the origins of Scientology, and I've written a lot about that in the last 40 years. My Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, the history of Scientology, I published first in 1990. And in there's a couple of chapters about Hubbard's involvement with Aleister Crowley, whom Hubbard called my very good friend in a lecture. They never actually met, but Hubbard was a bit of a con man, as Aleister Crowley, in fact, said in a letter to one of his followers. So I knew that Scientology had begun really in 1946 with a series of magical ceremonies where Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons, the famous Caltech physicist, chemist rather, where they sought to incarnate the Antichrist. They tried to bring the end days, Armageddon, and all of that. So that's the beginning point of Scientology. Now, in 1980,
now, was it a bet? What was it a bet? There was a rumor going around that L. Ron Hubbard made a bet, and it might have been with Parsons, that he could create a religion and have everybody follow what he said.
Russell Miller, who I worked with on Barefaced Messiah, the biography of Hubbard, excellent biography of Hubbard. Between us, we found 4 people who in the late 1940s, Hubbard had said, if you want to make a million, start a religion. So there's no doubt that he had the thought in mind. But the twist is fundamentally that while he used a lot of Crowleyite material, he kind of reframed it. So he took the ideas of Magick and moved them into something else. So where, for example, Crowley will talk about thelema, or the will, how you impose your will on other people. In Scientology, this becomes intention and how you make people do what you want. Crowley talked about the magical memory, being able to recall your past lives, and that's a central part of Scientology, though unfortunately they don't actually have any way of helping you to do it. They just tell you to remember it. Sorry about that. So there's an awful lot of Crowleyism in there. But the other thing that I don't know, when I left Scientology, which was in 1983, and I was a customer, I was never abused or humiliated in Scientology, unlike just about everybody else I've met who was involved with it. But when I left, somebody gave me a copy of a book called The Morning of the Magicians by 2 French guys called Pouls and Bergier. And it's this fundamentally this idea that that the Nazis were inspired by occultism, that they were paganists, that they were, worshipping Wotan or Odin, and that they gained power in this way. Now, I don't really believe in the supernatural. That's been and gone for me, that train.
Isn't that an attraction with Scientology? Is that it kind of doesn't get into the supernatural as much? It sort of divorced itself from, God per se, like, many other, religions and or cults that are, very tied in with religiosity. I feel like Scientology almost was the first MLM sanitized way of creating a cult, but it wasn't specifically like a God-based religion. Am I off on that?
No, and I think you're right. And there's an argument, a legal argument that was fought in the courts here in England in the 1960s as to whether Scientology was a religion. And the High Court Judge Lord Denning ruled that Scientology was not a religion because it had no object of worship. There was no God. And then he made an aside, unless L. Ron Hubbard is the God of Scientology. And so you have this split, this conflict that Scientology claims to be a religion, and now in this country too has recognition as a religion, as it does in the US and various other places, but it doesn't have a God. It doesn't have worship. The devotion is indeed all to Hubbard, who's called the Source, and fundamentally the pinnacle of Scientology, the greatest secret of Scientology, is what is called the Operating Thetan Section 8. So there are 8 sections to this course. When I was involved, I did 5 of them, these upper levels, where you're meant to acquire superpowers. As yet, spoiler alert, nobody has achieved supernatural powers. But the 8th level, Hubbard very cannily kept it to himself because it's ludicrous. And people have paid something like $500,000 to get to it. When it was finally released in 1988, a part of it had already been leaked, and it's called the Student Briefing. And in it, Hubbard says that he is with Lucifer, forgive me, and the Antichrist, and that he had an inkling that he was going to have to stop the second coming of Christ in 1945. Now, this is exactly the year that he met Jack Parsons, and they started talking about doing this. So when I first saw this thing, I didn't believe it. I mean, I knew that what was being said was true from my own research. Hubbard was very definitely on the dark side of the force and was a practicing sex magician. He was somebody who wished to control people and devised Scientology to psychologically enslave people and, of course, to physically enslave members of his so-called Sea organization, SEA, body of water.
Well,
Sea.
starting with Parsons' wife, right?
Well,
Didn't he? Didn't he cuckold Parsons?
Well, it's even more confusing than that. She was Parsons' girlfriend, but she was also Parsons' sister-in-law. This may be how Magick circles. He was married to her sister, but he was sleeping with her.
Oh.
And Hubbard ran off with her, and then bigamously married her without having dissolved his first marriage. As he would famously say, there's an interview on my channel called "The Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard." And in this, the only hostile interview he gave for TV. And in this interview, he's asked about his second wife. Now, he said that he had this wife, Polly, and he had this other wife, Mary Sue. But he says, I had no second wife. So he had a first wife and a third wife. He did say he wasn't very good at math. So, yes, he ran off and spent all of Parsons' money, was sued by Parsons in the courts in Florida. But basically picked up these ideas. Now, in this bulletin, we are told that the second coming of Jesus will be the arrival of an alien invasion of Markabians. And Hubbard, although he said that the universe has been around for 1.25 quadrillion years, and some estimates are more, which is quite a lot more than the 13.8 billion that scientists currently reckon. We've gone into trillions and into quadrillions. But he only actually talked about 4 or 5 civilizations over this period. So Halatribus, Ars Laicus, and Markab are among these. And he would just keep coming back to them. And when I first saw this bulletin, I dismissed it. It had leaked because, I say, while what was being said and it was true, I couldn't believe that Hubbard would ever tell anybody that this was what it was really about. And what's explained here is that the whole purpose of Scientology is to stop the second coming of Christ, which is an interesting thought, given the way that a variety of Christian churches have supported Scientology's right to be a religion and what have you, that it's there actually to completely undermine them. Of course, Scientologists don't know this. This is only at the very highest level. It's absolutely top secret. You could only take this level aboard their cruise liner, the Free Winds, out of the Dutch Antilles. It's all locked briefcases and cameras everywhere and this kind of thing. That bulletin, I traced it, and I've now been in touch with 4 people who were aware of it being released, 2 people who took the course in the 1 week that it was available. The end of the week, people were leaving. People were saying, that's not what we're in Scientology for, to stop Christianity. And 2 people who were helped to put the course together have also spoken out about it. There's a book called Lonesome Squirrel that only existed in manuscript form, written by a man called Steve Fishman. And Fishman claimed he'd been an agent for Scientology, working in their intelligence department, which was called Branch 1 of the Guardian's office at the time. And he said that he had befriended Hubbard, who was suffering dementia, which is that we can confirm that. And he'd found him in his hiding place, which was San Luis Obispo, Creston. And he'd been given this material by him. Now, Scientology sued Steve Fishman to get it back, which was the first indication that it was genuine. Not a clever thing on their part. Fishman was a con artist. Tony Ortega has done work at the Underground Bunker on Fishman. And he made this stuff up, but somehow he got his hands on this highest level material in Scientology and released it. So when it came out again later, I gradually came to accept, as I say, there are 4 people who confirm it. This is real. This is the hidden purpose of Scientology. So I dug into the occultism, and as I say, around about 1984, I'd read this, I thought, fantastic, in the sense of incredible, untrue book by Paul Zimbergier, saying that the Nazis were involved with magic. And over the years, anything I saw that was about that, there's Ravenscroft's Spear of Destiny, which is also nonsense. Then there was a book called Hitler and the Age of Horus by a guy called Gerald Suster, who is himself part of the magic community, which is something we have to be careful of. But he seemed to have some good documents. And then a professor at Exeter University, Nicholas Goodrick Clark, wrote a book called The Nazis and the Occult. Now, this is absolutely properly sourced. So I became aware in the late 90s that yes, Himmler and Hans Frank, the governor of Poland, Rudolf Hess, the deputy leader of the Nazis, they were occultists. They were involved in magical practices. Then Michael Wood, who's a British documentary maker, made a very good documentary about Himmler and the Wewelsburg Schloss, the Wewelsburg Castle, where he had a round table waiting for King Arthur to come back, who is actually a fictional character. The stories of Arthur were made up. The first mention of him is, if he existed, is 300 years after he existed. But they were very well into that as well, and they looked for the Holy Grail. They went to Montségur looking for the Cathar Albigensian relics.
Wait a minute. So the Raiders of the Lost Ark is real?
Yes, it's absolutely. And the guy it's based upon wrote 2 books about Montségur, and so yeah, they looked for the Ark of the Covenant. They looked for the Spear of Destiny. They did want these things, but getting into it in a deep way, there seemed to be 3 factions within the Nazis. You've got Himmler, Heydrich, Frank, Hess, and they are occultists. They believe in the worship of Wotan. They believe in the Aryan people. Then you've got the much larger Christian faction within the Nazis, which has not been greatly talked about and should be. There's a wonderful book called Holy Reich by, references are in my book, can be found there. And this guy looks at how the 28 Protestant churches in Germany collaborated, accepted the idea that Jesus was an Aryan, not a Jew, and accepted the idea that Christianity had come to end Judaism. And that was, the Catholic Church was the only Christian church, as far as I can tell, that fought against this idea. And so there were 28 Protestant churches, including the mainline Lutheran Church. So I became interested in the Aryan race fantasy. Why did these people believe that they were somehow separate from the rest of the human race? So they believed that Germans, Scandinavians, and the British, for some reason, the Scots, Welsh, Irish, and English, were all part of this Aryan people. And there are interesting things about this. The first is, if you ask somebody who's a neo-Nazi or a believer in the Nazi idea, where does the Aryan race idea come from? They won't be able to tell you. It's just a belief. And the reality is, it emerged at the end of the 19th century. It's that recent. So you get a confusion. There's a French aristocrat called Gobineau who is frightened that he might have black ancestry because the French aristocracy did have children by slaves who they'd raped, and those children would be brought up in the aristocracy. And Gobineau was fearful that both he and his wife had a black ancestor somewhere, and he created the first dollop of the Aryan race theory. Richard Wagner, the composer, was a devotee of Gobineau. And Gobineau's idea of Aryan race is not the same as Hitler and Himmler's. His idea is that Scandinavian, and that through the Normans, they became the aristocracy of France, but the peasants are of a different blood altogether. It's the silly blue blood idea. So Gobineau put it that far. And then an American state congressman called Ignatius Loyola Donnelly in 1882 published a book called I think it's called Atlantis, the Lost Continent. And he's not the first to do it. A couple of people before him had gone to it. But the idea is to pick up the stories told by Plato in two of his talks about this legendary place Atlantis that had existed, according to the Plato story, I think it's 7,000 years before the story was told to Plato, that these people from Atlantis had a war with the Athenians. Well, in 7,000 BC, there weren't any Athenians. There wasn't anything there to be fighting over. That story, Donnelly picks it up and starts talking about the Aryans in Atlantis. And a few years later, 1888, Madame Blavatsky writes The Secret Doctrine, which is one of the most important texts ever written, because about 50% of modern cults derive from her teaching in that book. So, Church Universal and Triumphant, the silver shirt fascist movement in America, they come out of this. Anthroposophy, theosophy, all sorts of variants. And they influenced Rosicrucians and Masons, which is where two of the places she was taking ideas from. And she develops this idea of Aryans further, so that the Aryans are white people. And she separates off and says that there were two Adams, a red Adam and a yellow Adam, and the Jews come from one line and the Aryans come from another. So she has that racial distinction. She was not proposing that anybody exterminate anybody. Her idea was that through reincarnation, we would all ultimately become Aryans, and then on to she calls them the fifth root race, then on to the sixth and seventh root races. Now, the Nazis didn't read that bit of Madame Blavatsky, because the superior race will actually emerge through interbreeding in America. So you've got something to look forward to there, probably.
Okay.
And when you start looking at this and go, so this daft idea, this crazy idea, came from this quite remarkable woman who, one of her biographers said, she was probably the most learned, if not the wisest woman of the 19th century. And she certainly had a remarkable intelligence. She spoke 9 languages. She could quote page after page from memory from books, but she checked everything against her own imagination, which is the tendency of such people. Does it feel right? Yes, it feels right, so it's true.
What you describe, for some reason, it popped in my head. It reminds me of Ted Kaczynski, who, by
The
all
Unabomber.
accounts, was an absolute genius. Absolute, without a doubt, genius. A lot of his ideas about how technology was going to subsume the world and things like that are still being quoted to this day. It's like he really was
Yeah.
ahead of his time, but he happened to like send bombs in mail.
Yeah, he didn't have the right
so,
solution to the problem.
so it kind of like this woman, as you're describing her, sounds almost like that, like, with just utter genius, speaks all the languages and everything else, but might have a screw loose in there.
Yeah, it's exactly that thought. And I mean, the same with Jack Parsons, who Hubbard did his magic ceremonies with. Parsons invented solid fuel, which had something to do with space travel and
Rockets.
the moon landings. Yeah,
He was a rockets guy. I mean, his work with rockets was huge.
yeah, he's really important and incredibly intellectual and very well read, and yet he believed the Crowleyite nonsense. And it is nonsense. The way that Crowley constructed things is very slapdash, and he didn't actually find out what he thought he'd found out. But
can we talk about Crowley? Because he is so influential. Can we get a general biography of him? Because I get the impression that, I don't know, he's a bit of a P.T. Barnum with a drug problem, but maybe you can help me out. And
I think that is true. He was probably a poet would be the right word, not a very good one, I don't think. I found him very difficult to read. He involved himself with magical groups like the Golden Dawn, the great poet W.B. Yeats, who again is, he's a great poet, but believed daft nonsense. Yeats believed that his own child was the Messiah, was the second coming. And so when she, at the age of 4, walked into a gathering where he was holding forth to the intelligentsia, everything had to stop so the little girl could tell them what to do. Crowley was involved with that, and he started to develop his, as you say, he was quite keen on substance abuse, heroin, morphine, cocaine, alcohol, pretty much anything he could get his hands on. And he developed his own magical system. He said he was inspired by a deity, and he transcribed the Book of the Law, which I think was 1904. And that's the point where he goes through a transformation, and he writes up an idea of magic and how magic should be pursued. This is very much in the air at the time. Blavatsky's done it too. He's doubtless reading her. And the idea is to take all of the gods of all of the pantheons of all of the people in all the bars in all the world, and to bring them together so that you say, well, the goddess called Artemis by the Greeks is the same as the goddess called Diana by the Romans. Now, this isn't in fact true. You can trace the origins of the gods and goddesses, and there were attempts during Roman times to conflate all of the deities. It just doesn't fit together.
right, they renamed the Greek gods, from what I understand.
No, they Diana and these names are original. They possibly come from the Etruscans, but they already exist. So what they do is they take the characteristics of the Greek gods and fit them into. But if you look at, say, Pallas Athene, for whom Athens is named, you're not looking at Minerva, the Roman. So it's this attempt to make them all the same. It's called perennialism, this idea that all religions have a common source. They don't. There are common sources, but there are developments and changes, which means that there are religions that have completely opposite views of certain things. so, which we see between the Iranian and the Hindu religion, that sometimes a divinity that's considered good in the traditional Zoroastrian religion is considered bad to the Indians because they were enemies. So it gets very complicated, but Crowley tried to pack everything together and say, well, when he was worshipping Isis, he was also worshipping Horus. He was also worshipping all of these things, which were the same as, and he liked the Roman and Greek ones. He didn't get so much into the Viking ones, which of course the Nazis would do. He practiced rituals to try and achieve magical powers. One of the things that he did was he's known for this statement about the will, that do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. And so to develop his will, one of the exercises he did was to carry a razor blade in his pocket. And if he said something that was not forceful enough or that was not right, he would cut himself. He would punish himself to make himself really strong in some way. Part of this is the willingness to do things that are considered immoral and to do them deliberately so that you will gain power, so they believe. Now, he died a heroin addict in 1947 in fairly squalid circumstances. Because I was interested in Hubbard's association with Crowley, I actually in 1984 interviewed John Simons, who wrote The Great Beast, which is a huge biography of Crowley. And it was an amazing conversation. I've still got it tape recorded and listened to a bit of it the other day. And he said, hey, he was a terrible man. He knew that I hated him, but he made me his literary executor because he knew that I'd tell the truth. And so he'd got all of Crowley's papers, everything that was available. And of course, Crowley's become there's all this mystique around him because of people like Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin.
Right. Rock and roll prophet.
He's on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band as one of the people we like. That was the description of those people.
They were also doing heavy acid at the time.
And somehow or other, they managed to create a masterpiece. Who knows? But I think the heroin that John Lennon was taking during the White Album may have been a bit too much for him. But if we can go with the song Cold Turkey about him, how he had to come off it. But you can see in Get Back that he's pretty well gone, John Lennon, which is very sad, very brilliant man. But yeah, so Crowley is adopted by the hippies as if, by being a rebel, that's something positive. But in fact, he was involved in sex magic. The idea of he was anti-Christian, most certainly. And he believed that, he was the beast 666, that he would bring the end days of Christianity. And just like Hubbard, he would stop the second coming. This is a little bit of a theme. When we get to Charles Manson, of course, which we've talked about before, he too believed that he was the second coming. And he too referred to the Book of Revelation as his primary textbook, which is...
And the Beatles.
And of course, they've all absolutely denied all of his interpretations or supposed interpretations of their work. A Helter Skelter is just a conical slide. We used to have them in this country. It's not... I don't think any member of Manson's group knew what a Helter Skelter was when asked. They just took it as some kind of statement, but they used to be at fairgrounds in this country. So there's this tangle that goes back. So Crowley is taking material from Madame Blavatsky. Madame Blavatsky has developed this Aryan race theory. This is picked up particularly in Austria. The Austro-Hungarian Empire has been shattered. The Prussians, the people who would become the next Reich, the next empire, went and in 1865, they take over. And that empire has within it many language groups. And those language groups start to identify as ethnicities and start to believe that they are German or they are Slavic. What's happening in Russia at the moment the neo-traditional movement, Alexander Dugin, is very much about Pan-Slavism, which began somewhere around 1900. And among the Pan-Germans, and they've got control, they've got the upper hand throughout the empire. So, in what would become Czechoslovakia and in Romania, there are different language groups, but the German speakers are in charge of everything. But they start forming these groups. Very quickly, this guy called Guido von List comes along, and the List Society is born. And this is an anti-Semitic group who believe in the racial superiority of the Aryan people, who are no longer the French aristocracy, remember, which is who they were a few years before. They're now anybody who is from Northern Europe, Western Europe, but not the Slavs. Hitler made it very clear, not the Slavs.
Question, and because I'm not really deep in this history, what were the Bohemians somehow tied in, or what they were called Bohemians at the time, or adjacent, or just concurrent?
But Bohemia was the Czech part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the kingdom of Bohemia had been absorbed. Good King Wenceslas is the Bohemian king that we celebrate at Christmas. It had long been incorporated, along with much of the many of the Balkan states, into the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and basically little clubs formed, and some of those clubs, the List Society was not simply promoting the idea of Aryanism, it was promoting an end to Christianity and a return to what they thought of as the Viking religion. It's a word of some contention, in fact, but Danish, Norwegian, Scandinavian, Icelandic, that part of the world. And this was adopted by Himmler. And there's a direct link. The List Society, which was founded in 1908, one of the people who was a major player in it was a guy called Dr. Franz Hartmann. We don't know if he actually was qualified as a doctor. We do know that he lived in Colorado for 12 years, where he performed eye surgery on people. So the fact that he managed to stay still for that long means he probably was quite good at it, hopefully. Or maybe there were a lot of blind people in Colorado when he was there. But he went back to Germany when he was in the States in the 1870s. He went to spiritualist meetings. And this is another really important change in our culture. Spiritualism, the way, for example, that we think about ghosts now, doesn't have a history going much before the 1840s. So the way we think about it, the Fox sisters who started spiritualism, two of them, they spoke to the dead. They spoke to the spirits of the dead, which was, of course, it's heretical as far as Christianity is concerned. You can't do it because the spirits around you are demons. They are not the spirits of the dead. That is Christian doctrine going back to Augustine. But this idea goes through the culture. Franz Hartmann goes to spiritualist meetings and he thinks there's something there, but he can see that these people are all frauds. And one of the two Fox sisters did later fully confess as to how they were doing their little tricks to con people. There are still spiritualists. There are people who are not willing to believe what she said about what she'd done, but that's the way of it.
Well, and Houdini took over that role at one point, correct?
Yeah. Houdini was the sort of James Randi or Derren Brown of his time, and did incredible things. He was involved with Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. And Conan Doyle's wife was a medium, trance medium, who channeled, and she channeled a message to Houdini from his mother, his dead mother. And Houdini had two problems with the message. First, it had a cross drawn on it. His mother was Jewish. Second,
Jewish.
it was in English, and then his mother never spoke a word of English. And he then started to make public demonstrations and showing how many of these table turning and writing on slates and all these things were done. Derren Brown has done them all too, since, showing no magic involved.
Well, Derren Brown is a great crossover as well, because he's dipped into the mind control um, aspect of things, which gets dark. So, I mean, Darren Brown, I didn't know about his exposing fake mediums and things like that, but I definitely know of his MK Ultra like work, at least in terms of hypnosis and things of that sort. So, very, very interesting.
He is. I mean, he calls himself a mentalist, and he's twice demonstrated that you can make a Manchurian candidate. You can, using hypnotic means, persuade somebody to try and kill somebody. Famously, Stephen Fry was the target of the first one. He was on stage, and somebody got up in the audience and tried to shoot him. They didn't realize it was a dummy gun. So he managed to do what the CIA in all of those years claimed they failed to do. So yeah, he's fascinating in terms of understanding how readily we can be duped, how readily we can be deceived into thinking something is supernatural when it's natural. So I found this guy Franz Hartmann, and the other, he's a member of this society that is fundamental, and that this society will, within a few years, it's founded in 1908. In 1919, the Nazi Party is founded within one of its successor organizations, which is a magic group called the Thule Gesellschaft, the Thule Society. Thule being the northernmost point of the world, and it's in mythologies. This in turn was part of the Germanen Orden, which was a magic group that subscribed to the ideas of Guido von List. So you've got that direct connection. The Nazi Party, the National Socialist, National Deutsches Socialist Arbeiter Party, the NSDAP, is founded within a magic group, which derives from this group, which Dr. Franz Hartmann had helped found. The other group that Dr. Franz Hartmann helped to found was the Ordo Templi Orientis, which is the group that Aleister Crowley will take over. And they are already collaborating with Crowley. So suddenly you've got this guy, and he's there as a source for Aryan race fantasy and the magical ideas of the Nazis. He's also there as a source for Crowley and therefore Ron Hubbard. So you've got ideas that, and they're fantastical ideas. They're stupid ideas when you look into it. Madame Blavatsky is saying that intelligent life began on Earth between 200 and 300 million years ago, and that there were discarnate beings without bodies, intangible beings. And then there are 4 other races of being that come along. She talks about there having been a war that was waged for 1 million years out of Atlantis in the air. Now, because she's writing in the 1880s, there are no aeroplanes involved. It's balloons, dirigibles fighting with each other. But for 1 million years, 1 million years of warfare, if you walk the battlefields of the American Civil War or of the English Civil War, both of which lasted for about 4 years, you will find lead everywhere you go from the munitions that were used at that time. That was just 4 years. If you had 1 million years of aerial warfare, there would be some evidence of it. That evidence doesn't exist. So she made up these fanciful stories about the past and then about the future, and consulted her imagination and determined they were right. And these ideas are currently the basis of neo-Nazism. They're ideas that are accepted by the far right, which still includes Wotanists, people who believe in the god Odin or Wotan.
Which is a bastardization, correct,
Oh yeah,
of Scandinavia. They mean that, like when you mentioned Norway, etc. If I recall, Norway was extremely Christian around that time, or by that point, with churches and churches and churches everywhere, very, very Christian.
absolutely. It's very difficult to study to find out really what the people called Vikings believed. We have what are called the Eddas. There's the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, which come from Iceland, and they're before Christianity takes over there, but they're still quite late. And as with the Greeks, that when you look to the Greek myths, if you're a kid at school, you'll be told this is what this god did, and this is what happened to Perseus and Theseus and all of these people. But when you actually go and study Greek myths, say through Robert Graves' remarkable collection, which is published by Penguin, you'll find that there are often, say Oedipus, for example, there are 3 versions of the Oedipus story. There isn't a consistent story. I mean, we could say the same thing about the Gospels in the Bible, but we won't because we don't want to get into trouble. But there are conflicts, there are contradictions. And over the years, as Bart Ehrman and others have shown, that there are additions that are made. And so
Sure.
reinventing a religion, so the way that Gardner did with Wicca, with witchcraft, in the 1950s, late 40s, 50s, this guy invents a history, which is the history of witchcraft. And it's neo-paganism. They're made up and modern ideas that Druidism in our time. They're things we don't know what these people did. We, because there are so few written documents. There's, we have the runes, but they don't really go into elaborate detail. Unlike, say, Egyptian rituals, which we know a great deal about because of the translation of Egyptian materials. But there are people who, again, they reach into their imagination and they say, "Oh, this is the truth." One of the most surprising things to me, and I shouldn't really get into this because it's not in the book, but I started looking at Carl Gustav Jung, the famous psychologist, and realized that he was as mad as a bat, and he and Freud, who I also am not very keen on, had such an influence on people's thinking. But when you get down to it and you look into the details, I mean, Jung published a thing called the Red Book, which was the diary of his insanity. He had a period of several years where he was completely out of it and recorded it in the Red Book, which was finally, I think, published in the 1990s. He had the largest collection of alchemy books of anybody in the world, any individual, and he believed they were true because they felt right, because his imagination chimed in. And he's very much influenced by Madame Blavatsky too.
Jung is of importance now because I don't know if I'll call him a disciple, but somebody who's very influenced by him is Jordan Peterson.
Yes.
Jordan B. Peterson very, very much is a Jungian scholar, I guess I would say. But he's very influenced by him. So a lot of Jungian messages are out there right now.
No, of course. It's pure supernaturalism, and it has no basis in reality. When we look to senior Jungians talking about the mysteries, the courses that they do, they sort of go, there is this top secret course, which is the alchemy course, and we don't show that to people unless they're, and you're going, it's a cult. It's just a magical cult. It's just a continuation of Blavatsky. So I wanted to look at the origins of these ideas and where they went. And once the leadership of Scientology had withdrawn, there's only 1 week that this bulletin, the student briefing for operating thetan Section 8, it's only 1 week when it was available. And then David Miscavige withdrew it. And I've talked to somebody who was there when that happened as well. And so he knows that the purpose of Scientology is to stop the second coming of Christ. He knows that his guru, Ron Hubbard, believed that there are Markabian aliens on this planet taking over. And the penny dropped for me. I realized that if you look at this if they did take the world over, then anybody who disagreed with them would be a Markabian. Now, their policies towards those of us who've disagreed with them thus far is to practice fair game against us. We are outlaw. We are outside of the law. A Scientologist can do anything they want to somebody such as myself, who has been declared a suppressive person. That includes an instruction to destroy us within Hubbard's writings.
Question on that, because I do want to be as fair as possible.
Yeah.
When you say they can do anything they want, would that be within the legal parameters of whatever country or society they are in?
That restriction is what he said is that there will be no discipline from Scientology for somebody if they do this thing. So as long as there are legal systems, you're fine. But if they run the legal system, then there'll be no punishment for Scientologists. Yeah. And it's very important. I mean, they claim they've cancelled fair game, but in fact, the issue from 1967 says It causes bad public relations, putting the words fair game on any order. These words will not appear on any order again. So that is to say, we won't make it public. They, of course, continued harassing. I was harassed right through the 80s and into the 90s, long after that was issued. Scientologists broke into my house. I was followed wherever I went. People with placards walked around. Private detective traveled the world to find people I'd known as a teenager to see if he could collect stories on me. And they put out, scurrilous gossip and reported me to every, it was absolutely dreadful that this is something masquerading as a religion that seeks to silence its critics. Now, thankfully, there are thousands of critics. So it's a lot easier for me to do what I'm doing.
Sure. Question on that. And this circles back to the religion point. I've always got the impression that Scientology is a quote religion for the tax purposes.
Yeah.
That it's maybe a bit cynical in the sense of, oh no, we're a religion, we don't have to pay taxes. And they went through an entire battle with the government, the IRS, infiltration, everything else. And in a way, I kind of respect it in a crazy sense, like,
oh yeah,
or admire it. To say, no. I mean, to literally bring the U.S. government to heel, to say, okay, we give up your religion. That is pretty impressive. But
yeah,
through that, I always thought that was it. It was like, they're not really a religion. They just are for the sake of taxes.
On the 10th of April, 1953, Ron Hubbard wrote a letter to the woman who was running the Hubbard Association of Scientologists, a woman called Helen O'Brien. She provided me with that letter. And in the letter, Ron Hubbard says, "What do you think of the religion angle?" And he basically says, we couldn't be making less money than we are doing. Maybe this would be a way of making more money. There is nothing about it actually being religious. Professor Hugh Urban wrote a very good book called Scientology, A New Religious Movement. Now, there should have been a question mark there because you get to about page 210, I think it is, and he says why it isn't a new religious movement, that it is pretended. It's done those things that are necessary for it to be recognized. Now, when I was a customer of Scientology for 9 years, I never once thought of it as being a religion. When I talked to the chaplain at St. Hill, down in the south of England, their headquarters there, he told me that every Sunday he ran a service in the chapel and he'd never had anybody attend it. So that was, but they had to have the service to make the legal application to be considered a religion. I also, I was involved in from 74 onwards. So I met people from the US who had taken the minister's course in Scientology, which is a 1-week course, which is you read a little book by a guy called Houston Smith about the world's religions. Then you're ordained a minister, and then you couldn't be drafted. So Scientology could keep its staff during the Vietnam War. And I don't remember ever in the 9 years I was involved having a conversation with somebody who tried to tell me it was a religion. Then it became public relations, and as you say, with the IRS, the day that the IRS sort of went, it's just not worth it. It's costing us much more money than we're ever going to make from you. Scientology dropped 3,000 lawsuits on that day. So I think it is fair to say that they're the most litigious organization that has ever existed. And then
I agree. And by the way, there's a disclaimer on the bottom of this description for everyone who's watching that these are opinions and they are not based in any kind of reality. So please let your lawyer know that it's already been a disclaimer. So just treat this all as fiction and have a nice day. Speaking of treating it as fiction, and this involves speculation on your part and mine or whatever.
Yeah.
Does David Miscavige actually believe all of that? Like, there's a part of me that, again, maybe I'm jaded, but I feel like you get up so high in the program, but you can't undo what's already there. And well, it's kind of good to be king. So I'm just curious, in the high, upper thresholds of Scientology, specifically Miscavige and all that, do they actually believe that bullshit?
He can sue me for saying this, but I think he does. The question I asked for a long time, for the first 10 years after I left, and I left 42 years ago, was, did L. Ron Hubbard believe it? And I came to realize that he believed some of it. He believed it on certain days. And because Hubbard was pretty demonstrably bipolar, he had vulnerable collapses, as narcissistic people do, where he would sit in bed for days weeping and bemoaning his fate. And I interviewed somebody, a girlfriend he was doing that with in 1950. After his first book, he'd just sit in his bed and drink whiskey.
Didn't he like speed a lot?
Yes, handfuls of it. In fact, it was a source of inspiration for the most bizarre Scientology book, Scientology: A History of Man, which I would recommend to anybody. It's only 90 pages long. And if you want to know whether Scientology is a good idea or not, just read that book. If somebody gets into Scientology, just say, read this book and see how they feel about the inhabitants of Mars and Venus and the bizarre that, that we're descended from clams and all of these. So yes, the story of that is that his son by his first marriage, his oldest son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., turned up in 1952, finally 18, finally able to go and see his dad, who'd not paid any child support or anything like that, not had anything to do with him. And he turns up, and the first thing, according to L. Ron Jr., Nibs, is his dad gave him a handful of amphetamines and said, lie on the couch, I'm going to ask you some questions. So he contributed to this book by... and Hubbard, there's no... there's nothing anybody can sue us about in this. The book, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, I don't think Miscavige has actually taken out Hubbard's recommendation that you take amphetamines, that it helps the so-called auditing process if you're high on speed. And there are many other places. He says grab hold of benzodrine, a type of speed.
That's kind of another tie to the Nazis, because if I recall, they very much were fond of benzodrines as well.
Yeah, in the form of the drug is called Pervitin by the Nazis, and Hitler was very fond of it. He was also taking cocaine, according to we have the medical records, Hitler's medical records, and by the end, he throws the doctor out of the bunker because he's realized what he's done to him. But he was a very sick and drug-addled human being. The other thing with Hubbard, there's a lecture where he talks about his addiction to phenobarbital, the barbiturate drug. And he says he'd made himself a guinea pig in one of these experiments, and it's a pretty tough job getting off phenobarbital. Now, that absolutely accords with his Navy records, which show him for a year basically avoiding duty, pretending he has an ulcer. There is no evidence that he did. X-rays did not show any ulcer craters, but he manages to get out of service and has a year taking barbiturates. And I tracked him in 1965, so 20 years later, trying to cash a prescription signed Dr. L. Ron Hubbard at a pharmacy in East Grinstead. So he was still quite keen on it. And indeed seems, it's kind of through the looking glass that Hubbard and Scientology, he's the opposite of what he claimed to be. He wasn't liberating and dehypnotizing people, quite the opposite. And he talks in a 1952 lecture, he says, life's a game, everything is a game. And in a game, you have pieces, and they mustn't know what the rules are. Then you have players, and their job is to keep the rules from the pieces. But then, of course, you have the game maker, who doesn't have to follow any of the rules. And he's let things slip there and then pulls the veil back again before people have necessarily realized he's talking about himself. He's making this game, and we are just the pieces in it. He's moving us around and making of us what he will, which was absolutely awful. The conditions that he subjected his staff to, working a 90-hour week, he wouldn't let them have toilet tissue. And he, at the end of his life, leaves $648 million, all of it taken from Scientology. He had no other source of income. His fiction was, they were paying to have it published, fundamentally, when he wrote Battlefield Earth. They bought 40,000 advance copies and paid $250,000 to St. Martin's Press to do what they wanted with to promote it. So they lost money on that. But he made a lot of money from Scientology, yet treated his staff in ways that you just, health and safety rules wouldn't apply. You cannot treat people, and their food, their lodgings, they're banned from having children now.
In fairness, though, their contract is only $1 billion years, though, right? It's not forever.
Yeah, that's true. Once you've done the billion years, and of course Hubbard promised that Scientology will make you self-determined, and then as a member of this organization, you promise to follow and uphold command intention. So, but it is only, and it's the American billion, which is 1,000 million. It's not the more savage British billion, which is 1 million. So only 1,000 million years of servitude.
To wrap up with one last question. Did he personally ever intersect with Nazis or collaborate or anything in any way? Or were they just both influenced by the same thing and kind of worked in parallel?
Yeah. Tony Ortega, the illustrious Tony Ortega, dug up a connection between Ron Hubbard and Leni Riefenstahl. In fact, I think it may have come to him from Chris Owen.
The filmmaker?
Yeah. Leni Riefenstahl lived in the 1960s, lived in L. Ron Hubbard's apartment in London. They were close friends. And when he was promoting apartheid, he was going to Africa and saying how terrible black people were, publishing things which are in the book here. He asked her to go over and make a documentary showing that white South Africans were not so bad, really. And amazingly, Leni Riefenstahl wouldn't do it. She was, no, I don't agree with you, and I'm not going to. But they worked on a script together. So yeah, he had very close connections. Of course, for anybody watching, Leni Riefenstahl made Triumph of the Will about the 1934 Nuremberg rallies, where Hitler spoke, and Olympia, about the Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936. So she was a core member of the Nazi establishment and became a very close friend of L. Ron Hubbard's.
Wow. Okay. So there it is. Well, I like to wrap up, and I do have one more question. That is, what is the one question I should have asked you but neglected to?
Oh, my phone number, probably. What a good question. I think it's about the consequences of this, and my concern. I get into eugenics, and I get into the Nazis. The Ahnenerbe Ministry, the Ministry for Ancient Heritage, headed by Himmler, had 50 departments. It spent huge amounts on excavations and digs, and the horrible medical experiments we've heard about. And they were trying for 12 years to prove that there was an Aryan people. And because we don't want to think about Nazi science, quite rightly and understandably, the fact that they proved that there is no such thing, after 12 years and hundreds of thousands of observations, they were unable to distinguish somebody Jewish from somebody Mediterraneanoid, from somebody Teutonic or Aryan. So it was a complete failure. I think the other thing beyond that, which is important to know, is that what Himmler was trying to do was create a super race. So he had these places called the Lebensborn, where at least 8,000 children were born. Their fathers would be SS officers. Their mothers would be blonde, blue-eyed women. The most famous of them is Frida with ABBA. She was a Lebensborn child in Norway. And what Himmler believed was that he was going to breed superpowers back into these people. So Scientology and the Nazis have the same aim, to create people with superpowers, godlike beings who will dominate the world.
Wow. Well, again, the book is If Scientology Ruled the World, Nazi Occultists, Sex Magic, Space Aliens, and the Second Coming. And I believe it's available on Amazon and just about anywhere else. Is there an audiobook of it? I don't recall.
There is an audio book, and the first chapters
fantastic.
are on my YouTube channel, so you can have a listen to my dulcet tones. It's not good bedtime reading. It may give you nightmares, but
All
there are so many things that have just not been said that should have been said, and I'm hoping that in future scholars will pick up some of the things I've pointed at and research those. But there is an incredible den of something or others. There's an incredible amount of information that's not generally known, and I think to do something about the development of the hard right and the Nazis, understanding Aryan race theory, understanding its nonsense. I mean, in the US, you have neo-Nazis who are Slavic in origin, who believe they're Aryan. You're going to go, and Hitler would not have accepted this. Himmler gave an order for the Waffen-SS and the Allgemeine SS, 1.25 million troops that he commanded, to kill 30 million Slavs, so that there'd be Lebensraum, settlement room for Germans. And they came very close to that number. It was more than 20 million. It may have been as much as 27 million. And it should be added to, when we're talking about the Shoah or the destruction of the Romani people, we should also be looking at what they did to the Slavic people. And there's no doubt about it. That was the intention. It's made clear in Mein Kampf. Slav means slave. They are to be destroyed and enslaved. And I think we're still fighting that battle. I think, the Russians are still responsive to that battle to try and create a pan-Slavic union, which is, terrible, awful thing.
right. Well, Jon, thank you so much. And we'll try not to take so long in between.